Friend, enemy, or frenemy? How do Indians view the rise of China and its implications for India's rise? Join the conversation on this important topic by taking the China Challenge survey. The survey has been put together by researchers at the Takshashila Institution. Answer our 10 simple questions and let your voice be heard in shaping India's policy towards China. For more details, log on to www.takshashila.org.in or you can click on the link and take the survey in the show notes. Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of All Things Policy. I'm Malathi, Renati, and I head the policy school at the Takshashila Institution. And today, the guest I have on the show is Nandan Kamath. He's a household name in the sports industry, but I'd just like to give a brief introduction. He's the co-founder of Sports and Society Accelerator, as well as the co-founder and managing trustee of the Go Sports Foundation. He recently released a book, Boundary Lab, which gives a very interesting take on India's sports ecosystem. I highly recommend for those who are interested in Indian sports and would like to kind of understand the nitty-gritties of it. He was also involved with drafting the Target Olympic Podium Scheme, the TOPS, and was a member of the committee to redraft the National Sports Code. So welcome, Nandan, and welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Malathi. So happy to be here.
Yeah, thanks. So today, Nandan and I will be having a conversation about the second-order effect of sports in our society, in the effect it has on the markets, as well as in shaping government's policies. Okay, and both Nandan and I, we've played sports at some point, up to the national level, and so even now, even though our careers sort of took a turn, we kind of at some point would. And have Nandan, in Nandan's case, he's a sports lawyer as well. That he's come back to the sport because of the love of the game, right? And so I would like to ask Nandan, when you first started off playing, right, and you've gone on to represent Karnataka at some point, could you just tell me what the scene was like in those days, and what was it that kind of drew you to the sport?
Yeah, no, thanks for that question, Malathi. In terms of second order effects, I am a second order effect of sport and the way I've approached it, and in some sense, the things I got from it. So, I mean, from my little microcosm, when I was playing sport, I mean, I started off literally playing on the street like everyone else does,
Right.
playing multiple different sports. It was whatever I could get my hands on. When the Olympics happened, it was all of the games of the Olympics. When it was Wimbledon, you'd play tennis. So essentially using any implement or anything that looked like an implement to play the sport. So it was very, very exploratory in its nature, right? So it was about using every opportunity you have to, in some sense, have sports expression come out. So it was very much a little laboratory for a young person to explore the world. But it was also a great way to make friends. So in the neighborhood, at school, and then eventually to also build an identity. If you start doing well, you start getting recognized as not just someone who's nerdy or wants to study, but also as someone who's multifaceted. So in many ways, as a young person, it gave me all of these things. But also, you realize that at that point, I'm talking about the 80s, sport wasn't so structured. I think we had a reasonably open format, which has its benefits as well. But I don't think we had such clear professional aspirations of wanting to win the Olympics. We didn't even believe we could win at the Olympics anyway. But it was a much more, I would say, even to call it a cottage industry would be a misnomer. It was just part of amateur life, the things that you did alongside your daily things. It was like kale, it was play. It was not sport in many ways. But I mean, as you started progressing, you realize and you go and see the world and you see how much more not only structured was organized sport, but how much sport was also woven into the daily life and culture of other societies. And as I went to study in different jurisdictions, I lived in different countries, we saw the gaps that were there in the way we interacted and interfaced with sport. And more than that, just how we use sport in building a nation of sorts, or building a culture, building society. And in India, we've been resource constrained in many ways, and it's very understandable that sport was not a priority. But as we've grown in resources, but we've also grown in aspirations, and that's something that's quite exciting to see the space and the role we're seeing for sport. And I'm hopeful that it'll take its rightful place in this nation building process as well.
Right. Thanks, Nandan. Thanks for that. I always love listening to stories of how each, because as sports persons, right, each of us have a unique story of how we kind of actually got into sports and what has really kind of taken us along. And sports is a life skill. I still recollect the time when my dad and mom both used to be into sports, and my dad actually played football, hockey, and used to tell me of the days when he met when Dhyan Chand had come over to his school and
Yeah.
he kind of coached them. So it's all very inspirational, right? And they go on to play for the district and then eventually for the state. And even in my childhood, when I grew up in Zambia, the facilities there was pretty good in terms of for extracurricular activities. And after school, I used to look forward to the sports period when I could play, get onto the sports field. We used to have what we called kick rounders. It's very similar to baseball, but you kick the ball instead of hitting it with a bat. And that was what was the beginning, I think, of how from there it went on to table tennis. And when I represented the school, I was the only girl in that whole tournament to have represented sports as a girl for table tennis across the school level. So it was it sort of brings out the best in you. You kind of develop resilience. You know how to overcome obstacles, even in your personal life, team building, how to communicate and ensure that you can keep moving along despite the hurdles that one faces. So I think the life skills that sports teaches us is kind of is there for good, and it helps us even in our professional lives. So I mean, this is great. I think, and that's a journey that I think each one of us as sports persons, right, will always look back on and kind of relish.
Yeah, and actually, Malathi, I just wanted to add that really, I think the concept of play is just intrinsic to human life, whether
Right.
it's structured or unstructured play. I think the concept of playing is it's just such a core and basic human capacity, but also a need.
Right.
And the reality is, all of us as young people, certainly as babies, we play, and that's the first thing we do. Even before we talk
Hmm.
or walk, we learn to play.
Right.
And we're all players in some sense. And at some point, most of us drop off from the concept of play and deprioritize it.
Hmm.
And I think there's something to be said for keeping that child going. And the notion of continuing to play is actually at the root of, I would say, human development, just living a full life. And perhaps we've got some balances wrong of living lives without play in it. And sports
Hmm.
is one expression of play, but there are so many different ways to play. And I think the people who manage to stay the course and continue to play through their lives have retained a little bit of being childlike throughout, despite
Right.
various obstacles. Because I think all of us face obstacles in playing.
Mm-hmm.
And the question is, do we have ability? Sometimes it's privilege, but the resilience to overcome obstacles and keep playing in some sense. And that's a underlying theme that I continues to sort of keep me curious, keep me excited, but also motivated to keep people on that journey of continued play.
Right. And that's so important too, Nandan, right? So actually, even the Olympics, right, that just concluded. So at the time of recording this episode, just for our viewers, that the Paris 2024 Olympics just concluded, and India has garnered 6 medals. That's 1 silver and 5 bronze. Of course, Vinesh Phogat's appeal is still under consideration, and should that work out in our favor, we'll get 7 medals essentially. But that apart, while many will argue that this is not a number proportionate to a population, right, of 1.4 billion, we need to understand that this is despite all the gaps and glaring sort of missteps, right, present under the hood of our sports ecosystem. So being optimistic, in the past there was a lot of cynicism back in the 80s and 90s, right? It was like, okay, what can sports do? And even economically as a nation we were not really there, but over the last decade or so we do see huge strides that have been taken, and it all comes down to what we want, what change we want to bring in also, right? So the thing with the Olympics also, and I'm just mentioning the Olympics, is because over the last 2-3 weeks, all the other depressing world news related to the wars, the natural calamities, all this was overshadowed by what was known as the largest sports spectacle on earth, right, as it's called. So it's more than the sport is more than just a series of athletic competitions. I mean, we're celebrating humanity, the unity, the spirit of perseverance. And that's what makes Olympics so special. And everyone around the world it's almost like there's an invisible thread that
Yes.
weaves through individuals, communities, nations, and connecting them in a shared experience. That is so that's a powerful force that essentially. And
Absolutely, Mathi. Yeah,
yeah,
I think it's commonly known as this cultural commons that we're all part of. And
right.
I think in that sense, the Olympics and organized sport is so unique, right? Because one of the few things that everyone in the world, and I don't think there are too many exceptions,
Hmm.
has accepted that has cultural meaning. So it is worth being an Olympic medalist, right?
Right,
And
right.
that's globally accepted. And also, one of the few things where we, except for some of these cases where there's disputes, we
Mm.
accept the outcome of a process. There are very few other things where there's global acceptance of one outcome being acceptable and recognized by all, right? So there's something special about this Olympics. At the same time, I mean, while we accept that this is global meaning, to in some sense judge yourself or judge your own entire nation based on where you appear on a sort of a medals tally and table is something worth questioning in that sense.
Mm.
But what are
Mm.
your thoughts on that, Malti? I think we have this national awakening once in 4 years saying that we're not a sporting nation. Look at the sort of the Olympics tally. Isn't it obvious that we're not a sporting nation? But perhaps it does disservice to the path we have already traveled and the gains we have made.
Yeah, it's very true. And I think one should also remember that we are a nation of 1.4 billion. It's not easy to mobilize, and each state in India is a country in itself. Right? So the challenges we face are multiple. Each state has its own economic, benefits, natural resources, cultural, and so there are a lot of hurdles in India, which is very unique. I mean, as compared to other nations, elsewhere in the world. But the nice thing is that now the government, to a small extent, has played a part in this initial shift over the last decade or so. And I think it's important to also give sports its due in terms of how it can help in sports diplomacy. It can also help in putting policies from the public health and welfare perspective. So these are sort of policy formulations and national identity that it helps create. That from a government standpoint, right, they can start seeing sports as a medium to do that. So, what are your thoughts, Nandan, on that as well? Because I think from a government perspective, you've also been working quite closely on this, and I'd like to hear
Yeah,
your thoughts.
I think, Malti, it's a very, very important point because I think for a long time we've seen a reasonably unitary view of what sports is and the role of government in sport.
Right.
So we've seen this the excellence model of where we how well we do at the international scale and the government as delivery agent of this. So the government in implementation mode, and if we do well, great. But if we do badly, it's the government because it's the government that athletes have not succeeded, right? And
Right.
that is put in some sense the government under the pump to say, okay, hey, let's try and produce these Olympic medalists. And if there's a political consensus, in particular in the citizenry, that Olympics medals is the role of sport,
Mhm.
then that's where we'll sort of shape our attention. And you see large part of the budget, not only national but also state governments around the in some sense buy into the concept that sport means elite sport, sport means competition, and sports means excellence. So, in
Mhm.
some sense, the identity based sort of view of sport that if Indian athletes or whatever athletes from Karnataka or Uttar Pradesh or wherever do well, there is a closing of the loop, and the state's role is to ensure that talent of the best and highest quality is able to progress, and it shows that the state is working. But I think if you see over time, yes, that is the dominant narrative, showing that sport has a working system. If the sports system is working, the government is working, but also there's national pride associated. You start seeing a gradual shift and a recognition. I think it's very early and nascent still, but
Mm.
that sport is actually not just an outcome, but it is actually an instrument to deliver so many of the things the government wants:
Right.
healthcare, education, and in some sense, it's a delivery instrument. One,
Mhm.
it delivers maybe some unique outcomes, but certainly there's a lot of evidence to show that it hastens certain outcomes. It could be
Right.
inclusion of certain people who are on the margins, bringing them into the mainstream. It could be perception about gender. It has this role undervalued so far, but slowly emerging into government conversations,
Mm-hmm.
where you recognize that sport is much more than building this nation through sport is an opportunity that just cannot be missed. Getting people more active helps physical activity rates, help physical wellness, but also mental well-being, reduces NCDs, non-communicable diseases. So there
Mm-hmm.
are all these elements which we've really not thought through fully, which is how do we keep a healthy population with our demographic dividend that's going to last. There's a window that we have. How are we going to get our young people moving through a lifetime? So all of those aspects are now entering very strongly into government conversation. So it is not a unitary conversation any longer.
Right, right. And also with Kalo India and the other initiatives, right? Fit India movement and other things that the government has
Yes.
done, I think that's has been in the right direction. But we also know that the government, I mean, if you look at the Samaj Sarkar Bazaar, the three pillars, the government's role in this one will, and many will argue, and rightly so, that the government needn't do as much as we expect them to do. I think often we think the government has to do everything, solve all the, especially even sports related, when they
That's
don't
it.
win medals. Why isn't the government funding enough? But because there's a larger issues that the government has to solve: education, there's poverty, there's the whole lot of other things. But as long as certain aspects can be taken care of, and I think that's something that we can discuss on another day. But if the government can focus on putting the checks and balances in place, it'll go a long way. But the other pillar in the three, in the Samaj Sarkar Bazaar, which is the bazaar, I think will be interesting for us to look at, because we know that just like art and culture helps boost multiple opportunities for learning. It could be entertainment, leisure, and by the way, sports comes under entertainment in our constitution also. um, Likewise, even the markets can help spread more awareness, and eventually it can also develop the whole ecosystem. We've seen when the IPL is around for those 3 months that
Yeah.
there's a whole ecosystem built around that, from your retail and merchandise to the branding, sponsorship, the tourism. The cities that do host these games kind of get quite a boost economically as well. So I think the economic advantages that sports can offer is something that we should not discount. The infrastructure development as well. So there's a lot of things that can happen, and the second order effect of that would be getting more jobs into the market. I mean, there's more employment, and this could be across different states, because India is such a large country, right? And the economic divide is quite a bit. So, what are your thoughts on that, Nandan?
I think it's a hugely important point. When you think of sport, most people think of careers in sport as the
Mm,
economic activity, which is the people who are
right.
playing. And of course, that is central to wanting to get the best talent, is to make it meaningful for talent to actually be in, and some level of professionalization, fair pay, perhaps equal pay. And
Mm,
those are core conversations. But I think the conversation that we need to have and haven't had yet is the growth of the ancillary industry
mm,
around sport. So
right.
the economy that surrounds sport, and one of the things that we have really underutilized is our deep sense of spectatorship. We love watching sport. We love watching. I would say the mix of sport and entertainment. And one of the things, for example, the IPL has captured that value, which is the crazy desire to be stimulated, to be engaged, to have a story arc, to have a beginning, to have a middle, to have an end, which is exciting. And we may not have necessarily fully explored our talents as participants,
Mm-hmm,
but the faster way, in some sense, to do that is to feed the demand that is there for spectatorship. And imagine a well working industry capturing that value of sports engagement.
mm-hmm,
What it does to, like you said, the tourism industry, small businesses around which are managing even just restaurants around venues. It could
right.
be travel and transportation. You talked about merchandise. I mean, there's so many other things that are like digital businesses, second screen experiences.
Mm-hmm,
Suddenly, it's a growing concentric circles from the core activity, which is the match that happens.
mm-hmm,
And around the IPL, there are probably 1,000 businesses today thriving, which would not have necessarily been in business if not for the IPL. So, how do we build these business models of catalysm, which
mm-hmm,
actually the single match happening in a venue is actually radiating outwards into the economy in many different ways. And
Right.
it's something that we have underexplored. While there are people sitting on the margins wanting to be engaged, wanting to be entertained, our ability to connect the matches in various different sports to those audiences is building the platforms, building the businesses, building the bridges. There's a tremendous amount, and world over, I mean, for example, in the US, in the multi-billion-dollar sports industry, it can come
Mhm.
from sports goods to young people wanting to play, to building sort of micro organizations, which are academies, which could be training centers, gyms, and other things also come up around that. So these,
Right.
I mean, we're going to be driven by small businesses, but also large businesses like broadcast, like media businesses. So I think there's so much to be said for, in some sense, the government also getting out of the way and leaving room for private enterprise to invest and to benefit from sport as well.
Absolutely. And I think with India being a tech hub, right, there's lots of potential there. We see now a lot of apps around things like the facts and figures. For it could be a tournament. It could be about around the players. There's lots of information out there, and fans also nowadays want to be more engaged and would like to have access to that information. In fact, recently for the Olympics as well, and I've used Geo to view the Olympics, and they've done a beautiful job of just that whole dashboard of the ability to kind of switch between sports, and the way they have summed up for every day's events, and as well as at the end of the Olympics, how they've summed up the days of the Olympics and all the highlights. It's very beautifully done, and it sort of draws people towards wanting to watch, and out of that curiosity, one will at least attempt to maybe pick up a sports instrument, sports equipment, and want to play when they've not done so before. And we know that with social media and other things, right, there are disadvantages. I mean, more screen time for kids. But now, having kids to step out and play, these are the sort of things that will kind of boost that, and which has kind of, unfortunately, over the last decade or so, we've seen the kids, especially when I look at some of the numbers. I think Lancet had this, where they said that there's the figures here are staggering, because almost half of Indians are not sufficiently physically active. So
Yes,
between
yes.
2000 and 2022, the number of adults who are engaged in insufficient physical activity has increased from 22% to 49.4. So that's like half of our population is not sufficiently active physically. And of course, women are found to be more physically inactive than the men. So this, unfortunately, is kind of growing, and the trend is not good. And we need to do something about this. And sports is one, medium, like you said, free play. Kids, I'm sure, would enjoy a free period of play out on the sports ground versus an extra math period, right? So I think that's something that we should keep in mind, that this is something that's just organically that what kids or even adults would like to do. Just play. It doesn't need to be organized sports. It could be just playing, just more having that community sort of feel to it, right?
No, absolutely spot on, Malti. And I think we have for a long time overlaid sport with sports excellence at all levels. So
Hmm.
even when we talk about grassroots sports, we talk about it as trying to find talent that will become excellent.
Right.
Everything, I think we can overdo the overlaying of structure and what you call organized sport on too many things in some sense, even school sports, right? So
Mm-hmm.
we have a school team and everyone else is just going through some drills in the PE period. So that notion of building a strong relationship with your body, building the motivation, but also the capability to live an active life through time, it
Hmm.
hasn't necessarily been prioritized because, in some sense, we've focused on trying to find some diamonds in the rough talent and
Right.
trying to help them progress. So these are not necessarily things that are at odds with each other, which is sports excellence and sports and physical activity for everyone, but they actually are in some sense intertwined and can actually support each other. So elite sport can play an ambassadorial role, but it doesn't play an automatic ambassadorial role. We've seen
Right.
lots of research, particularly after the 2012 London Olympics. So
Hmm.
one of the legacy aspects of that Olympics was to increase the physical activity rates in the population. But
Hmm.
the research that's come out in the decades since suggests that while there's a little bit of this inspiration effect,
Hmm.
suddenly every young kids want to be like the heroes they see, there's also in some sense a gap that develops because people see these athletes because they evangelize their superheroes, incredibly talented, and they say this is not someone like me, so let
Yeah.
the super
The bar
talented
is
be
too
super
high, right?
talented.
Right.
And the gap is very significant. So there's a lack of identification with superstars. And
Right.
the
Right.
person says, I'm going to stay on my couch and watch these superstars, and that's where my relationship ends. So it isn't an automatic, if we have increased our medal tally from 6 or 7 to 30 or 40, that our population is going to be more active. But if we are able to build the capabilities, build the surroundings, urban design and development, active schools and active workplaces, the building transit systems which actually promote a little bit of sort of active transit, but just overall making space for physical activity, and in some sense believing in the autonomy of the individual to find a way to remain physically active, if you're able to build capability and motivation early on in life. Because I think all of us will face obstacles. We talked about it a little bit earlier, in a sporting journey, but also in a physical activity journey. It may be a change of city. You may
Right.
suddenly sort of have some injury or illness. It's what you do to come back, the resilience to return, which is a combination of capability, motivation, and desire, which actually is where we should be working culturally, but also in the opportunity set we give people, in the physical environment, in the messaging. So it's a much larger project, in some sense, what we call building a sporting nation. It is not just about trying to get more people on the medal tally at the Olympics. That has its role. And in a larger, what I would call a sports stack approach, it plays an ambassadorial role, but it cannot, state policy and for our involvement as businesses, but also as civil society individuals, cannot end at just saying, if we succeed at the Olympics, we succeed as a sporting nation. It is one indicator, but it cannot be the sole indicator.
Right, absolutely. I think thanks, Nandan, for that. I think it's important for listeners to know that the sporting culture, right, it starts with us, right, as individuals. And if you look at a country like Australia, and they're one of the top sporting culture within the country, where they kind of, it's not just, most people in their spare time would want to step out, either play a game. It could be a team sport, it could be an individual sport. But the fact that they have, of course, they have the facilities for it, but it's a culture that's been built from the ground up, right? So the governments cannot be kind of enforcing this on us. If we as individuals would want to bring in that change, I mean, I think we need to kind of also showcase that it is the change that we want to see, right? It could be encouraging our kids to play. It could be we stepping out as well as adults and being physically fit. So I think that's very important. The nice thing about about sports as well, right, is the cohesion and the inclusivity that it can encourage as a result. Even in youth development, especially in places to ensure that there's positive youth development, like we mentioned in the past too, it instills the discipline, teamwork, leadership skills, and all these are essential for both personal as well as professional growth, right? So I think ensuring that we're constructively having avenues for outlets for energy as well as creativity is important. And sports, just like arts and other cultural activities, can be that avenue. Sports is also one of those. And before we kind of wrap up, right, I just one question that I just wanted to sort of pose, Nandan, that we could discuss. And this is something that now that India is already sending out signals of its growing intent to host the Olympics, right? The 2036 and maybe the 2040, we need to wait and see. But even at the India House at the Paris 2024 recently, right, Reliance 2 was kind of, Nita Ambani and Reliance were kind of showcasing how India is sort of ready. But we also know that hosting the Olympics is, though it's seen as a prestigious honor, to do so, it also comes with significant economic risks and challenges, right? So while the event can drive infrastructure development and boost tourism, possibly, many host nations have struggled with the financial burden associated with organizing the games. So these economic pitfalls can include sort of cost overruns, underutilization of facilities. It even goes into long-term debt. In fact, we have nations like even Montreal, which till recently they hosted in 1976, and till recently they were paying the debts for it. Right, the taxes were being kind of paid for the Olympics. So we know that it's outweighs the short-term economic benefits and the legacy effect too that you were also referring to briefly. So what is your take on this? I know that on one side, we know the economic pitfalls, and that's there for everyone to see. There have been some changes that the IOCA2 has brought in terms of sustainability, and Paris Olympics did show that briefly that it could be done. But the cost overruns have been there over the last few Olympics also. So what's your take on the effect that the Olympics would have for India?
Yeah, no, I think you've summarized it really well, Malti. The Olympics is a very expensive pursuit. So I think the key question is not whether it's worth hosting the Olympics at that cost, is what are the benefits? So I think if there are benefits, every cost is worth it, right? If you can justify the return on the investment you're making. And in many ways, what I do liken the Olympics to, I'm sorry for the very close analogy, is it's a wedding, right? It's a wedding event. Now, the purpose of the wedding is to, for two people to get married. So it's the relationship you evolve until the wedding and the relationship that comes after, in some sense, right? So you can have a very fancy wedding, but if there's the marriage itself is not strong, I think the purpose of the wedding is very much for other people. It's not for yourself, in some sense, right? So if you liken it in that sense, like it's what you do before and build that relationship towards that big top event, and then what it can do for you in the long run. Does it bring comedy? Does it bring those facilities to start being used? Has it built a structure, and has it front-ended sport in many ways? So there's a rhetorical value also of arriving, and that sense of we are good enough to host the best possible global event. So there are a lot of mixed things around. The Olympics is also a changing type of event. So they're considering multi venues, they're considering more sustainable games. So perhaps by that time, it will be a slightly different type of event, which makes it meaningful. But at the end of the day, we are a very large country having single venue develop at I would call the opportunity cost of other cities and other venues is a bigger question we need to ask. It's much easier in smaller countries where you have pretty centralized sports facilities. The capital is very often used to host the Olympics. Here, I mean, it would become, in some sense, if all of the billions of dollars went to one city or one venue, you would have a sense of lopsided development of sort of a sporting ecosystem in some sense. And what we need at this point is much more even development, much more private and civil society participation. The government playing, I would say, a leadership and signaling role, but in some sense stepping out of the way. But I don't think the Olympics gives you that luxury. The government becomes even more front and center in driving sports policy, driving the building efforts, build the sort of the international relations that come with it. So it's a very mixed bag of things. I think there has to be much more discussion. We haven't seen so much discussion in the public domain around whether it makes sense to us or not. At the end of the day, there is no India without all of us who want sport to become quite central to our lives. Not everyone might see the value of sport as well. So to presume that everyone wants the Olympics, I think is a pretty large presumption. And even those who want sport, is the hosting of the Olympics the best use of the limited resources, growing resources, but limited resources we have to spend on sport, is a much larger public policy question and very, very multifactorial in that sense. I know this is not a very clear and definitive answer, but certainly one that discussion that needs to be had in many more fora, I would say.
Yes, and so absolutely, Nandan. I think it's important for us to know that what we're getting into, right? But at the same time, they can be used as a catalyst to leverage and move sports forward. And there are many intangible benefits also. Economically, we know that it's never been profitable. I mean, there's no a country that's hosted and then they've even broken even. They've always been, the cost overruns have been there. In fact, in some cases, it's actually run into I think the Beijing was like 1,900% cost overrun. And the stadium, the Beijing stadium, continues to be a white elephant. But so we've seen this happening time and time again. But then we need to see how India is going to kind of approach this with the changes that IOC has made, and how the nation overall can benefit with just that, the motivation that sports can bring and taking things forward in both Samaj and Bazaar.
And I think that's the key point, right? Hosting the Olympics is a policy choice.
Right.
And we have to know that it's the policy choice that we want to take. So there are other options to get to the same place.
Exactly.
Is the Olympics policy choice we want to take? And that is the question.
Right. Thank you so much, Nandan. And for those of you who are interested to kind of deep dive further into sports, we actually have a initiative that was done by OpenTakshashila. It's a Takshashila institution open platform community. So along with OpenTakshashila and the Sports and Society Accelerators, we've co-created a 5-week online course on Indian sports titled Building a Sporting Nation. So this would start on 31st August. It'll go on till 28th September. For those of you who are interested in sports and want to kind of understand the nuts and bolts of India's sports ecosystem, then this one is for you. The details will be shared in the show notes, and applications close on the 29th of August. Okay. Thanks once again, Nandan, and hope to kind of have further conversations on this in the coming weeks as well.
Yeah, I will certainly impose them on you, Malathi. Great opportunity to chat now, and look forward to that course as well. It's an exciting one and lots to learn for not only those learners but also for the teachers, I think. So,
right, absolutely, yes. Thanks, Nandan.
Thank you, Malathi. Thank you.
If you liked our show, dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs. Check us out at our Twitter handle @Takshashila INST or our website takshashila.org.in.